Well, I didn't plan on talking about the VP debates, but I have to say I was so surprised by the performance of Mike Pence that I do feel compelled to say something about it. Because I went into this expecting Mike Pence to be awful. Not necessarily awful in a he'd go out there and embarrass himself kind of way, but awful from, by my standards, which, in some ways he still was, but as far as not really doing much to stand out, just sort of being there and doing his normal, politician shtick, which honestly I've always kind of regarded Mike Pence as a very, very generic Republican. He's not like the worst rhino in the world or anything like that. I think that by pre-Trump standards, Mike Pence would be a very competent conservative politician, but a politician nonetheless. The kind of person who regurgitates the right kind of platitudes and seemingly, based on his record, has stood by those. But when it comes to actually trying to defend those ideas, before an audience or, against a Democrat of different views, would back down. They would accept the premise of the moderator's questions. They'd constantly be on defense and just overall look weak. Kind of like, you could say, a Mitt Romney back in 2012. At least, Mitt Romney in the second and third debates. Or another good example, Paul Ryan in the 2012 VP debates, where he was, trying to be all in the weeds and talking about, his policy positions and things and how conservative he was and blah, blah, blah. And Joe Biden just kept talking over him and dominating him and made him look like a weak little man, which, frankly, he is. Pence last night, however, was far and away a cut above anything that you would expect from a typical Republican in a debate, even a typical conservative Republican. I think that he did better than a Ted Cruz certainly would have done. The reason for this, I think, is that Mike Pence managed to maintain a constant control over the entire situation, something that I think Trump, was trying to do in his debate. And you can't get more opposite than the Trump debate performance versus the Pence debate performance, because Pence here, while he is a very quiet man, he's a very polite man. He's someone who, again, to me, most of the time comes across as a very normal, boring politician. Last night managed to keep a leash on both Kamala Harris and the moderator, and he very much felt like the man who was in charge of that conversation. The topic of discussion at any given time was whatever topic Mike Pence wanted to talk about. And it didn't matter what the moderator said. If Mike Pence wanted to steer things back in another direction, Mike Pence said, no, I think I want to circle back and talk about this other issue. And then when he was done with that, he'd move on. And then the moderator would say, Mr. Vice President, can we move on here? And he said, please, go ahead. He would always he'd be the one giving her permission. She wouldn't be, shouting him down, kind of like Chris Wallace was trying to do with Trump, Mr. President, Mr. Blah, 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 blah. She wasn't doing that. And because, it's a little less justified when you have someone quiet like Pence who's going over his time. Although I should point out that in the end, Pence and Harris, in the time that I saw, they both spoke for the same amount of time. I believe it was like 36 minutes each. But every one of those 36 minutes, Mike Pence was talking about whatever he wanted to talk about. He never accepted the premise of any of the loaded questions that the moderator posed to him. There were a couple questions that he actually just answered straight, but they weren't not bad questions. But the important thing is that when he got, a bad question that was not favorable to him, he very skillfully talked about whatever he wanted to talk about, and it didn't come across as in every case, as just a total, cheap dodge. Because normally the way that a politician will dodge a question is they'll be asked an uncomfortable question, and then they'll just come up with some kind of platitude to spout and filibuster for their 2 minutes of their response, and not say anything about it, and then they move on. But Pence, in this case, took every opportunity that he was asked, sort of an aggressive question. He took that as an opportunity to go on the offense and attack Kamala Harris. And, that's just not something that you see Republican politicians ever do effectively. Throughout the debate, particularly the later half, because the beginning, I have to admit, I wasn't paying very much attention because I didn't expect it to be anything interesting. I just kind of had it on in the background, and it was only after I started to notice that Pence was outperforming my expectations that I tuned in a little more closely. But from what I noticed, Harris, in her stance, was constantly well, I shouldn't say defense, but she was constantly having to respond to things that Pence was bringing up. He really did come across to me as the center of this whole evening, and that's not something I would expect from him. Mike Pence is not a commanding personality. He's not someone who's ever stood out very much. I mean, it's hard to believe that he was once a talk radio host. He just doesn't have the personality for it. Because every time that he spoke, the contrast, looking at them side by side, looking at Kamala versus him, it really, I think, said a lot. Now, I don't think this is going to change any votes, really. I don't think that the VP debate matters that much. But just from a theater perspective, the way that every time he spoke, he was very calm and measured and was, in that very boring, serious Pence tone that we're all familiar with. And Harris constantly was just looking over, smirking. She looked sometimes exasperated, and it really just didn't mesh well against him. And it's kind of reminiscent of what Trump was doing with Biden the other night, except Biden didn't have the strength really to capitalize on it. If anything, I think that Biden was rattled by how Trump was responding to everything he was saying. Sort of the feedback from Trump was, I think Biden tried his best to hold in, because Biden, historically has been a man who's kind of prone to outbursts and is kind of a loud, by politician standards, a loud, outspoken guy. But he certainly, under no circumstances, would he keep his cool the way that Pence did. And so just seeing, Kamala with her smirking, with her, frankly, what to me looked like insecurity, I don't see how that plays well. And, we know that her debate performances are not exactly stellar, because even, in front of a Democratic audience, the debates did not help her. She was hurt in the Democrat primary debates, and that's why she had to drop out before there were any votes cast even in the Democrat primary. She was not a good candidate. And so when people are exposed to Kamala Harris and see her actually, being a politician, they don't come away from that with a positive opinion of her. And so I don't think anyone, came away from this thinking that, I just love Mike Pence. Isn't Mike Pence great? I don't think that was it at all. I think that people came away from it not... Darn, where was I? Well, basically, Pence is not somebody who really stands out ever. I mean, he's been vice president for 4 years. He had been in politics for a long time before 2016. How many people really know anything about him? How many people can really have much of an impression of him? They don't. The reason why Mike Pence did well last night is because of the contrast against Kamala Harris's, negative persona. She does not look good on TV. And I don't mean that physically. I mean that she just doesn't come across well. Mike Pence, on the other hand, is very neutral. There's nothing exciting about him. But he's never really going to piss anyone off. Nobody's going to watch a debate with Mike Pence and come away with it thinking that, boy, that Pence guy, he sure is annoying. He's a problem. I don't like that Pence guy. They either are going to think meh or, he was okay. And most of the time, that's not going to work out well. Because usually, if you're in a debate that matters much, I mean, you're going to have an opponent who has some case that they're trying to make. They have some redeeming qualities personality-wise. And so if Pence's opponent had come across as a likable person, in any way, I think that Pence would look pretty bad and bland by comparison. But Pence's, sort of straight man neutrality against the unlikability of Kamala Harris, makes him come away with people thinking, hey, he's pretty cool. I think that sort of serious professionalism really just worked out well in this case. And again, I'm not somebody who normally says that that's a good thing for politicians to do in debates. I think that the whole sort of Pence persona is not effective when it comes to trying to win hearts and minds of people. But if people have if you give people the opportunity and you show them someone who they don't like, like Kamala Harris, it's not that hard for them to say, you know what, I like Pence. But, other than that, does any of this really matter? Is it going to impact anything? Probably not. Pence clearly was trying to go after Pennsylvania there for much of the night and convince people there. Brought up a bunch of stuff about, Green New Deal and fracking, and got Kamala to sort of recant her and Joe Biden's previous statements, which, may, if you ask me, suppress the turnout of the far left or of even the, sort of moderate left who don't live in areas where those are important. I mean, I think that the disdain for fracking is pretty broadly accepted amongst the left. But again, overall, I don't think that this debate really mattered much in terms of the election. I just sort of found it interesting from a TV perspective, how it sort of played out as a program, as entertainment, as a performance. So with that said, if you get anything of value out of this video, I'd appreciate you clicking that like button and sharing this video. And if you haven't already, please do subscribe, because I do upload every day and I'd hate to have you miss one. So I'll see you folks back here tomorrow.